How'd the workout
Perfect.
go this morning?
It was good. Just a little, fine tuning, more of an off day physically for him. So we have tried to make sure that we're in a routine of hitting certain boxes. Obviously, with regards to what goes on during a football week, and many of the things that they're trying to accomplish there, we just try to fill buckets that maybe aren't getting as much time and attention. Obviously, he's getting tons of on-field reps, weight room reps, some stuff up in the training room there as well. Just being able to spend a ton of time with him, honestly, over the course of the past year, and especially with them getting sent home for 4 or 5 months, I feel like just having such familiarity with areas in which we're just trying to keep him in certain positions with regards to whether or not it's competencies that we value, or other little things that we've just become aware of throughout this process.
Yeah, I mean, most people would just be trusting the Division I program, but with your family's background, I mean, you guys are the top of college athletics all the way through. You got your father playing for Penn State football, your grandfather Penn State basketball, your mother was an national champion swimmer and an All-American, and your grandmother was one of the first female athletes at Penn State playing on the men's rifle team, or I guess competing there. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah. We've been pretty fortunate. You could say that athletics. Obviously, there's going to be a genetic component for sure.
Yeah.
But I think just some of the things that are emphasized just in the home, some of the what you call your family culture, is I think has been important to that just being passed on generations and generations as well.
Yeah, your effort and your motor. You're one of those NFL draft motor guys, you know. He's got a high motor.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like when people say like high motor and somebody that's going to ideally maximize their potential, you're talking about somebody who has these professional tendencies, right? And I think those can be applied to a wide variety of different arenas. They're probably a big reason why people, when they retire from sport, end up being successful in other industries because they're able to take, the way that they do everything and apply it to the way they do anything. I've heard that said vice versa, but I think at the end of the day, we have certain operating processes that we see among high achievers in all different avenues of society. And we definitely have just been fortunate to have things passed on. People are always like, oh, well, thank your parents. I'm also a big believer, thank your grandparents, because you are a byproduct of the messaging and the things that got passed on from your grandparents to your parents as well.
Yeah, that brings it back to you. I mean, you were a big-time college athlete playing lacrosse, 4 years at Ohio State, the captain over there, 2 years in professional lacrosse, and then you've transferred into a whole different arena as Dr. Josh Funk, a physical therapist at Rehab to Perform. What made you pick that as your career choice post-athletics?
I think for me, honestly, just loving what I saw. And it's like you mentioned all of the good things, obviously, that are going on at Maryland. I mean, you have an integrated team, you have medical, you have athletic training, you have, your strength and conditioning coach, you've got position coach, you've got your coordinator all the way up to the head coach, and everybody's kind of in the same area, so to speak, with regards to, ease of communication, very, very easy to have people on a more synergistic level with regards to what needs to get done from a player management standpoint. And I think for me, always finding that when I got out to see more commercial models of not just like physical therapy, but just healthcare in general, sometimes just seeing big disconnects, more of a siloing, so to speak. So if I draw that parallel over to the football world, you having more of an environment where people are siloing themselves, they're not talking as much, there's not a sharing of information, a lot less collaboration. And I would say that's kind of how I would look at healthcare now, where people, you go to one specialist and then there's very, very little communication when you go over to this person. So there's disconnect. And I think at the end of the day, that leads to outcomes that are not as ideal. So trying to put first, an environment in place that looked a lot like a Division I athletic setting. We've got an environment that I'd say is a combination of the athletic training room, but then also a lot of the things on a micro level that you might see in the strength and conditioning fields, facilities as well. Bumper plates, kettlebells, turf, sleds, assault bikes, stuff that athletes are very, very familiar with. Obviously, it's not the scale that you're going to get on a Division I athletic setting, But the ability to have the environment is first and foremost very important. And then education of the staff. Hey, can we take this person beyond just being pain-free? Do we know what performance actually looks like? Can we take what they need at the end stage of their sport with regards to certain performance variables and metrics, and then reverse engineer what they need back to where they're at right now? So that's the I'd say the big picture view of it. And then obviously there's a way to make sure that you've got synergy and coordination of care. I mean, if we talk about a situation with Jake, it's, I've gotten to know some of the people that he gets to work with up at Maryland fairly well, whether or not it's the strength staff there, the PTs who pop in there from the University of Maryland as well, the athletic training staff, and then just being able to coordinate maybe some small things with Jake and when he was getting reintegrated to position specific work. So being able to speak the same language obviously is important there as well. But it is, I mean, it's coordination of care and ideally doing everything that you can to drive those ideal outcomes.
I can understand as a registered nurse the healthcare disconnect, looking like some health 3.0 ideas going on there at Rehab to Perform. So I can appreciate that.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. I didn't know that. So
yeah. With you being a big time college lacrosse player and Jake obviously being a big time running back, there had to be some competitive family atmosphere growing up. What were the other things outside of those sports that got you guys really juiced up and competitive?
Man, I think honestly, you're probably going to get more competition. At least I think people probably view more competition than there actually is.
Okay.
I think if you look at our family, incredibly supportive of one another. I think if anything, we get on each other about routine more than anything. So it's less of outcomes, it's less of results, and we'll push each other on whether or not somebody was doing what they set out to do. If there's a gap in somebody, committing to a routine or doing what they need to do on a regular basis, it's an accountability piece. But I still even wouldn't view that as competition as much. It's not to say that intrinsically or maybe between the years there's certain things going on. Obviously, if one sibling is achieving at a certain level, I think it's motivating for the others to see some of the things going on and maybe to emulate some of that. Being big brother, I always will say that I'm more of I was like the test model, so I was the one that got to go through the trials and tribulations and maybe blaze a path that hopefully is easier for the younger ones. But at the end of the day, we're our own biggest, we're our biggest supporters in the house, whether or not it's in person or through, the connectivity of electronics. We've been able to just ideally be there and be more of an accountability focused person rather than somebody that's focused on the competition itself.
So if you guys had like a Freaky Friday situation where he had to play lacrosse and you had to play football, who's more successful?
Man, that's tough. I think at the end of the day, I always say, from an athletic standpoint, like Jake was like whatever I was 2.0. From a profile standpoint, very, very similar. But he just has a little bit more burst, a little bit more power than I did. He easily could have played Division I lacrosse. I got recruited to play Division I AA football a little bit, so that was something where I'm not gonna say that I would necessarily quite be at the level that he is.
So Jake's been put on record that Penn State never thought he was good enough, and seems to have a little spite on that. Do you got a team you were a little spiteful, didn't think you were good enough?
I mean, I'll be very honest. I mean, I think for me, the world of lacrosse is a little bit different in that you don't see a whole lot of big money scholarship offers.
Okay.
So you're living more in the world of partials and academic and athletic money being paired together often. Penn State probably viewed me more as a legacy and thought they'd be able to get me for a little bit less of a financial commitment. And that probably was the dagger, to be quite honest. The ability to go somewhere in a competitor in a very, very similar college environment for significantly less money made it an easy decision. And I don't know if that offer that was provided to me was a result of they just thought they'd be able to get me for a bargain. So in the back of my head, I love Penn State. I've had tremendous memories. Obviously, the fabric of my family can be attributed a lot to Penn State University. I'm trying to think how many. might have 11 or 12 family members who went to Penn State. So it would be hard for me
Wow.
really to say anything negative about the university in itself, but it just didn't present itself with the best possible opportunity for me. And at the end of the day, we beat them junior and senior year of college, which I'll never forget. Especially senior year, like running their goalie out of the cage and having them throw it back up, because I mean we were honestly just beating the brakes off of them. So
I like
you have moments, yeah. I mean, you have moments kind of like where Jake did, where he got to go out and prove himself on the field that my dad played on, and honestly compete against a team and a staff that didn't provide him with any opportunity. I mean, remember him going through the process and just sitting here and going, here you have a legacy that's doing a tremendous job in a neighboring state. I mean, not even a preferred walk-on offer. I mean, there was literally no communication. So that's something that we definitely, you don't forget stuff when people slight you a little bit. It's not to say that it's the thing that primarily fuels you, but it's certainly something that I think that you think about and you'll remember.
Chip on your shoulder always helps. So I saw the Big Ten special, The Journey. I only had one Power 5 offer. Really cool with both you and Jake in it. That came out yesterday, actually. It mentioned the 2 games he got injured in. And, of course, I knew what games they were. But just looking back at them, it's shocking to me with being the 2018 Ohio State game, the 2019 Temple game, that those already stuck out of my head as close and, like, depressing losses at the end. Like it was marginal there. And I just feel like, was there anything extra for Jake in those times that like he could have been the difference, or that that moment was like something he missed because those were his 2 injuries?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, and I think this is how you want me to take this, but he's always going to view his ability to be in a game as being a positive thing. Yeah. So his ability to contribute both physically, and I think what has been proven over the years when people call him like Coach Funk, or when he is even a sophomore, he's getting chosen to go out to lead the special teams, be the special teams captain for the week. Like he's carrying himself and doing things that go beyond his physical ability. He is somebody that ideally spreads positivity. His ability to control the controllables is something that should be contagious to others. So when we talk about like energy, effort, your enthusiasm, positivity, things that you can choose every day, ideally that creates this cascade. And I think he's always been that kind of a player. So outside of just him being able to physically be there for his team, being somebody that through the peak and a valley of a game, ideally can continue to contribute to the team moving forward and staying focused, say, on the next play, or making sure that, we're not getting too high or too low. Their big thing this year is getting back to neutral and staying even keeled. And I think, when you have a guy like that whose impact goes beyond just his physical self on the field, that you always like to think that with him on the field and contributing, it's only going to, return, 2x or 3x of what it normally would be, just because he's bringing those intangible benefits.
Yeah, it might be the homer in me, but Ohio State, I don't know if it changes. But Temple, we win that game with your brother in there. There were 3 attempts inside the 1 yard line, and that's where I want Jake Funk run the ball. That's where I want.
So he's got a nice knack for just finding seams. He's just always been able to do that. You remember looking back at film, even when he was young, and just going like, how did he even see that? He sees things that I know everybody talks about vision, and sometimes, I'm not a running back, so it's very, very hard for me to really critically break things down. But being able to sit there and remember some of the moments where we're sitting and watching film with my dad, both youth and in high school, and you're just like, how the heck did you even see that? So I'm with you. I mean, I'd like to think that maybe there was a couple more wins for the Terps if he had been back on the field in those situations.
Yeah. Did Jake ever think about hanging it up with these injuries, man? It looks like he's just like the little engine that could, that never gave up. But was there ever that moment? I mean, you were there for all of it.
Yeah, no, honestly wasn't. I think at the end of the day, having self-doubt is one thing, having fear is another. But when you allow those to take away from your routine and process, if you want to call it more of this buzzword, but he never deviated from the standard operating procedures in which he conducted himself. So although he was going through periods of self-doubt at different times, I think probably more so post-surgically, in that acute phase, rather than as we were getting back into I should say higher level activity, that he never wavered. When you talk about somebody that really allows self-doubt to carry over into something that can be negative, that's when maybe they're taking days off, or they're deviating from how they commit to routine, sleep, nutrition, the things that I'm doing to prepare myself physically on a field or in the weight room. And then all the little things that I think he does such a tremendous job of as well, which is regards to just little affirmations. So like reminding yourself of what you're able to do, reminding yourself of what you're in control of at that given moment, at that given day. And even no different than a conversation you're having even this morning a little bit, where you will never be in this position again. So you're either going to make the most of whatever position you're in right now, or it's going to be something that continues to hang on your shoulders. And ideally, every single day, whatever that self-doubt was and that fear, shedding it, right? It's like I have multiple shirts on, and I just keep shedding shirts, and I just want to get back to the one that I'm used to. It's an analogy where, say you're carrying a burden, right? You're if you continue to carry that burden around and you don't shed the self-doubt and some of the fear that sometimes will keep people from having the same kind of success again, then obviously he wouldn't have been able to get back to where he was at right now.
Did Jake ever consider training elsewhere, where it's always like the family's going to circle the wagons and we're going to take care of our own?
I think at the end of the day, without divulging too much, there was a lot of people involved in this process. So
Okay.
although Maryland is involved, although I'm involved, I would consider the people at Maryland to have a big network. I would say that I have a big network. So when I look at, once again, when we talk about collaboration of care, there were multiple different people who I could look back and say have all been involved in a process of this in a more direct or sometimes indirect role. So you can say the word consultant, but I have enough, I'd say just at least humility to always say more eyes on a given situation is typically better than just mine or even just myself and Maryland. So just being fortunate that I have the ability to reach out to people and have some people in my corner to audit processes and audit how things are going, I think has been really, really tremendous to have. So although the list would be lengthy with regards to people that I'd like to just say thank you to, and Jake obviously as well would know a lot of those people. They probably know who they are if they're listening to this.
That makes sense. So the again, as a registered nurse, I see people in some of their hardest times, and they're not the nicest people because of that. So working with family in a stressful situation like that would prove very challenging to me. What was the hardest part of working with family in this scenario?
Man, I think the hardest part is probably the psychological side of things. When you have that mental and emotional relationship and you can continually stay connected with somebody and you want to continually stay connected with somebody through the process, it's a little bit more challenging. It's not to say that you don't have the same level of connectivity. Well, you don't with every single person that you interact with, but obviously there's a disconnect at some point, typically when they leave the four walls of your facility, right? So for you, from a nursing standpoint, whatever facility you're working with, you try to connect as much as possible. All right, you're engaging with that individual, you're getting to know them, you're displaying your soft skills, right, and your emotional intelligence, so to speak, during those time periods. But for me, there was never any disconnect. He could leave a session 5 minutes later, and I could check in with him. He could check in with me. So it adds a whole different dynamic to the process, and I think that's something that obviously physical rehab is a big part, but I've talked about this a couple times. You have an objective part of rehab. You have a subjective part of rehab with regards to the physical preparation side of things. And then there are things from a psychological standpoint that sometimes are harder to objectify, but you're doing your best to make sure that there are things that you typically like to see in somebody returning from an injury. So appreciating all the different dynamics that were going on. I mean, honestly, I think there was even more dynamics last year where you had a new head coach, new running back coach, new offensive coordinator, just coming off of a time period where there was a hardship with regards to, a player on their team, unfortunately passing. So
Jordan McNair.
there were some things probably more in that 2018, 2019 time frame that were even more to manage. This year, just the biggest curveball we had to manage was his, inability to connect as much with staff at school, and him just being a lot more dependent on myself and our team for routine.
So you think was the first rehab more of a physical challenge to learn these skills, and the second was more of a psychological, like to get back into doing it because he already knew what the rehab process was?
I think for him, the intrinsic pressure of the first rehab was probably the greatest because he wanted to get back and he wanted to prove himself. And I'm not obviously suggesting that, you're trying to do anything other than what is best at any given moment. But I think sometimes the psychological pressure that somebody puts on oneself can put them in a position where they're just pushing the envelope. We had more time this second go around. And I think there was less pressure because he felt like the people in the staff knew him. They knew how he operated and they knew the value that he could provide to the team. And it's not to say they didn't have some idea of that last year and in the time building up to the fall 2019 season, but he felt a lot less of a push to get back to prove to others. This year was more of a push to get back to prove to himself that he could do it. He already knew how much confidence the people that he was getting back to had in him. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. I mean, with the first injury, he was coming back to a team that they were continually stacking NFL caliber running backs, as we have come to see. And so this year he came back kind of knowing if you do your job, you're going to be the man. And he did his job, and he certainly was the man of that Minnesota game.
Yeah, his relationship's better, like with Brooks and Coach Montgomery and even Locks. I mean, just you get more touch points around people, and they really know how you operate, and then there's more trust, and then there's just a different dialogue that happens, and you can use the word assurance, but he just had a lot more external and internal assurance that he wasn't having to prove anything as much, except for to just prove to himself that he was capable of what he thought he was capable of. So you combine that with extra time this year, and I think having 3 months extra when you talk about ACL rehab is obviously very, very important. You have time and criteria, and it's the continual juggling act between the two of those. It really put us in a great position this year where, remember, like the season starting later, and we both looked at each other and went like, wow, well, this is just an added benefit, like you can't beat this. You're going to start camp a month later. You're going to get a month more even than we thought you were going to get. So there's just a lot of things that I think 2020 has almost been a gift to him with regards to some of the things that have gone on.
He's one of the lucky few that 2020 was a gift for then.
Yeah, man, but make of it what you can. You know what I mean?
It's true. You got to make the best out of everything.
For sure, man. You can't hit the pause
your
button.
family had such a unique viewpoint of this whole season. There was very few people were allowed to see these Big Ten games in person. What was your experience like in these empty 100,000 person stadiums?
Sounds kind of crazy, but I mean, you look back at what Jake was able to even have like in high school, and I think there were allowed to be less fans at the games than Jake would have at a high school football game. So it was just
there's only 2,000 allowed for the Big Ten, and I don't even know if it ever got to 2,000 at any of those games.
And I think in terms of parents and like family and stuff, it was 4 per team. So you had 120 players, 4, you got the other team. I mean, it's a small amount. You got a Damascus like high school football games, like packed house.
Yeah.
Where there's maybe 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 people in the stands. Unless it's a rivalry game, there might even be even more. So it's a different dynamic. I think at the end of the day, you're probably going to see who loves football, right? Who loves playing for their teammates, who loves playing for themselves, and who might maybe like to just perform a little bit more and need that audience, so to speak. And it's not to say that you have a ton of guys like that, but some people just might need a little bit more crowd motivation in order to get hyped and get up for games. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of the athletes, and I'm not going to name any names, but we're very fortunate to support more than just Jake in the off season this year, and more Terps than just football players. But a lot of the athletes who are able to perform this fall are very, very happy just to have the opportunity. Sometimes looking at everything that you can't or are not able to do, obviously it's negative. Like, why even focus on that? Be grateful for what you can do. Be grateful for what you do have. Yes, it's a deviation. It's not to say that you can't acknowledge it, but I think when you get up the mindset where you're, doing things in a certain way that are the best with regards to your output, the more that you can control how grateful for you are and how appreciative you are of that opportunity, the more likely you're just going to go into gameplay more with this just level head, and you're going to take everything probably a lot better because you're starting from a foundation of positivity and optimism.
So unfortunately, the COVID effect this year did not end with empty stadiums for Maryland. We did have 23 positive COVID players. What's Jake's experience been through all this?
It's just another hiccup. I think at the end of the day, like, you got bumps in the road, and you got people once again that are going to hit the pause button. But for Jake, it was, hey, what can I do? So, not saying that he's somebody that's always just going to kind of push the envelope, but he's going to try to adhere to a routine as best as he can. So during a time period in which his routine was disrupted, how can I adhere to a routine knowing that I'm going to have the opportunity again at some point? If you put the pause button on, you could view that as detraining if we just talk about the physical side. So he wanted to make sure that during that time period, he did not go through a detraining period. So he was trying to figure out the best way to structure himself. And I think when everybody, sees this team play again on the Rutgers game, and when Jake's on the field, you shouldn't expect anything really any different than what you saw in the earlier part of the season. Whereas he could have very easily potentially allowed that routine to knock him back a few pegs, get into more of a detraining state, and potentially seeing something that we haven't been used to seeing in the beginning of the season. So, it's everybody keeps using the word pivot this year. It's more for me. I just kind of getting sick of that word. Shift and adapt. Right? You got to be a chameleon at certain times, and your ability to be effective is going to depend on your ability to shift and ideally find parallels between what you were used to and now, knowing that at some point you're going to get that ability to express everything that you've been working for.
I already feel like Jake's been at Maryland my whole life, but if there is another year of eligibility because of this COVID situation, you see Jake coming back?
I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing that he's going to have to figure out is the academic side more than the athletic side. So he will be somebody that is on track to graduate with his master's at the end of next spring. I don't know what the academic
benefit of another year would be.
To be quite honest, he's somebody people might have forgotten. He graduated early. He graduated his undergrad in 3.5 years, and has already been working on that master's. So he's somebody that, once again, you bring up like professional tendencies, the way you do anything, the way you do everything. He's obviously putting in work in the classroom. He knows that at some point in his life, football will end for him, and he's preparing for that stage, but he's trying to maximize and do everything that he can from a football standpoint. And should he decide to come back next year, I think a big thing will just be kind of navigating what opportunities are present academically, what he's able to work on with the academic advisors to put himself in a situation where, there's honestly just the ability, because I think there's maybe a little bit uncertainty of what that process would look like from a school standpoint.
Yeah, and would put him in a good spot for post-athletic success like we talked about. So
100%.
your post athletic success is this rehab to perform. What's next for you guys? What are you working on? Why don't you plug your spot?
Yeah, I mean, for us, just if you're not really familiar, think of a more of a fitness-focused healthcare environment. And yes, physical rehab is the kind of the bread and butter of what we do. So physical therapy, sports rehabilitation. Think about people. Honestly, like we see a ton of people that are fire department. They're working for the police, SWAT. Your more occupational style athletes, where their body is something that they depend on a regular basis. But people who are looking to get the most out of their body, we are a tremendous place for you. If you're looking for a place where you're not just focused on getting you back to baseline, but you have certain demands that you need or that you're expecting from yourself. Perform for life is our tagline. So ideally, by experiencing our company and all of the different things that we have to offer, you're in a position where you're becoming 2.0 of yourself. Through the educational process, the engagement of being around our company, ideally we'll have some level of empowerment that will put you in the driver's seat to be your best self.
That's great. So I got a couple more questions just from the fans. We're all done with what I got going on. I'm not sure you're going to answer all of them from going through this. One was talking about how you have your own performance center. So do you have any high school JUCO kids that we should be keeping our eyes out that are going to be big time athletes, whether it's for the Terps or elsewhere in the future?
Gosh, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to actually tell you names.
I figured
right?
that's where we would go. So we're going to, yeah, as I agree, this is going to be a HIPAA issue of who's being treated here. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's what I will say. We have a ton of the area's best high school athletes that we've supported. We supported, if we just talk about football, SEC, ACC, MAC, Ivy League, Big Ten. We didn't have any Pac-12, and we didn't have any Big 12. Actually, no, we had West Virginia. So we've really supported the DMV's best athletes. Being